Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Before I begin today, a huge thank you to Medicus for the virtual gift voucher. Huge thank you for the support, it is truly appreciated. Thank you. But on to today. Today we begin covering the huge talking points Dark Imperium Godblight contained. And well, there was really only one place we could begin. With the truth of Guilliman's conversation with the Emperor of Mankind revealed. Spoiler warning to begin, the events we are discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k novel Dark Imperium Godblight by Guy Haley. As always, I really recommend you read the story for yourself first, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. Not only that, we help to support the great Games Workshop and Black Library, because without them we don't have this amazing lore to talk about. I will put a link in the description as always. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. So Godblight, the finale to the Dark Imperium trilogy, and the culmination of the Plague Wars of Ultramar. The Clash of Titans, as Guilliman finally confronted his brother Mortarion. And as you might expect when two Primarchs come to blows, it was most certainly epic. Now the conflict itself takes place on the world of Ajax, a former paradise world of Ultramar, now a blighted and diseased garden of decay, as Mortarion attempts to blend the lines between reality and the immaterium. Roboute Guilliman of course knows he is walking into a trap, but what choice does he really have? He has to face his brother one way or another. And so Guilliman comes to Ajax, but he comes in force. And in the heat of the battle, the Macragge's Honor high above in orbit fires a warhead down into the heart of Mortarion's forces, a missile so destructive it rivals the nuclear warheads of old. And as Guilliman's tanks race away from the epicenter, the Death Guard and demons of Nurgle die by the thousands. And it is into this raging inferno the Ultramarines Primarch walks. Treading past the countless fields of corpses, Guilliman begins to call his brother's name, and immediately we're given a fascinating revelation into his inner thoughts, remarking to himself how if this were any of his more calculating brothers, he would never remotely try something so bold. Perturabo would simply obliterated him from afar. Alfarius would absolutely have laid some form of trap, and Lorgar would use it to preach his cause. And you can definitely see Guilliman's rationale here. He's not wrong in regards to Alfarius and Lorgar, and perhaps even Perturabo. Though it's undeniable the Lord of Iron does have a strong sense of pride. While I can easily see him obliterating Guilliman from afar, I can just as easily see him denying that order, and wanting to defeat Guilliman face to face. Regardless though, it's an interesting view of how Roboute views Perturabo. Clearly Perturabo's sheer practicality and cold decisiveness takes place over his pride in Guilliman's mind. However, when it comes to Mortarion, Guilliman has no doubt. Mortarion will want to face him, and a few moments later the beating of wings herald Mortarion's arrival. The two brothers greet each other in a pale comparison to any true brotherhood of old, both admitting they have the other exactly where they want them. And Mortarion references Fulgrim's slaying of Roboute once before. With the simple pleasantries over, the brothers begin their fight. Now, in the days of the heresy, I'd be fairly comfortable saying most people would expect Mortarion to come out of this duel with the victory. Despite Guilliman's popularity, he was never wildly heralded as one of the greater Primarch fighters. But you would be remiss if you disregarded him completely. Guilliman gets slept on as a fighter far too much. For all his strategic genius, he is still a Primarch at the end of the day, and one of the most lethal warriors in existence. Here, however, Mortarion of course has become a demon Primarch, elevated further still by the boons of the Chaos God Nurgle. And despite Guilliman wielding the Emperor's sword, you have to think the advantage lies with Mortarion. As the two brothers clash against one another, the strikes come thick and fast, Mortarion clearly having the reach and size advantage, yet Roboute the speed and unparalleled Emperor's sword. Guilliman, to his credit, damages Mortarion's scythe, before the Death Lord retaliates with his psychic power, boasting he is more powerful now than Guilliman can ever dream of. And Guilliman responds by taunting his brother, calling him a slave, only for Mortarion to reply with "So are you." Now, as in any Primarch encounter, the brothers are always fairly talkative when taking on each other. The only exception to this being Rogal Dawn, when he savagely killed Alfarius. But here Guilliman is no exception, and he can't help but appeal to his fallen brother, asking him what happened to the man who stood at Nicaea, the one who was against any use of warp-given powers. And it's a very true sight of the Primarch Guilliman has become since his return to the Imperium. He was always a more human soul than many expect, due to his boring reputation. But so devastated and grieved has he become since his return, you almost see those human qualities of his personality more personified than ever. He may hate Mortarion for everything he's become, but you can also see very clearly the hurt he has in seeing a brother so far fallen. Honestly, if Mortarion stopped to have a sincere conversation with him, you do get the sense Guilliman would absolutely listen. I'm not saying the fight wouldn't come, but he would most definitely talk with him first. As it is, the talking only comes between blows, and Guilliman unleashes a flurry of bolter fire straight for his brother's face, Mortarion reeling in pain as the shots come in. But that would be the last advantage Guilliman would have, as Mortarion's demon elevated form soon recovers and sends Guilliman flying with a kick to the torso, and he rounds on the prone Ultramarines Primarch with the use of his psychic power, before battering his brother back to the floor. And here, as Roboute chokes beneath the diseased fumes of Mortarion, the Death Lord injects his brother with the Godblight, the plague created within Nurgle's cauldron, to kill a Primarch. As Mortarion watches his brother suffer, appealing to him to accept the gifts of Nurgle, Guilliman's mind retreats to the only place not immersed in pain, and his mind enters the memory of standing before the gates to the throne room itself. For all Guilliman's self-stated apparent change of heart when it comes to his father the Emperor since his return to the 40k timeline, I think the truth comes far more often from actions. Guilliman can claim he doesn't care for his father, that the veil has been lifted, and he sees him for what he is. Yet here, in his greatest moment of torment and suffering, to where does he run? Straight back to the last memory of his father. I think that speaks for itself. You can control your theoretical and practical Guilliman, but you can't control your emotions. Now, it's not explained how, but Mortarion is viewing Guilliman's memory here too, and you assume it's simple psychic ability, as Mortarion taunts his brother for wanting their father to protect him. But as Trajan Valoris bids the great doors to open, the light of the Emperor pours out like a star, and despite everything, Guilliman feels hope. With Mortarion gasping in shock, and as the blinding images of the Emperor assail the senses, there's a fantastic line. He had many faces, all proud, all betrayed. He saw Malcador in him, the first regent. He saw his brothers. A single line of description, but it gives us so much. All proud, all betrayed. Clearly relating to the Primarchs here, his greatest creations. We've seen from the earliest days before the age of the Crusade, the Emperor took to calling them his sons, long before he'd reunited with any of them, just sensing they still lived from across the galaxy, the beginnings of a proud father, and yet one with the heresy who would feel the greatest hurt of betrayal. And then Guilliman seeing Malcador, seeing his brothers. Now this could simply be Guilliman's mind and reflection, or the theorists out there can use it to further their claims that Malcador is the Emperor. However, for me, I find it a rather touching notion that after all this time, all the years of suffering and torment upon the throne, the Emperor still holds on to the memory of those dear to him, his one true friend Malcador, and his sons, his greatest triumph, the Primarchs. Now, as it continues, Guilliman continues to be assailed by different images of the Emperor, before falling to his knees before the throne. Though, interestingly, Valoris stands beside him as if nothing is happening. As Guilliman voices his pleas, telling his father he has returned, begging him for his guidance, asking him what he should do, Mortarion stands stunned, in horror. And then, that thing, that terrible, awful thing, upon the throne, saw him. "My son," it said. 13, it said. "Lord of Ultramar. Saviour. Hope. Failure. Disappointment. Liar. Thief. Betrayer. Guilliman." All of these words plunge into Guilliman's mind at once. For the first time since ascending the throne, the Emperor of Mankind speaks. Roboute Guilliman, the raging tempest, spoke his name, and it was as the violence a dying sun rains upon its worlds. Guilliman, Guilliman, Guilliman. Now here, honestly, we witness the state of the Emperor of Mankind, and how, whether through necessity, choice, or against his will, the Emperor's mind appears to have been shattered into countless pieces. Guilliman senses many minds reaching out to him, all attempting to commune with him, violating his senses. and it stated that one mind comes from the many, a raw, unbounded power, and it gives him wordless commands to go out and save what they built together, only then to contradict itself, to destroy what they built, to save his brothers, to kill them. And for those older heads out there, it's very similar to some of the much older lore regarding the Emperor from the early 90s, when an Inquisitor Draco gains audience with the Emperor. And here he is met by a multi-voiced being referring to itself as we, who states it's the only way the Emperor can be everywhere he needs to be. Now, while that was retconned or abandoned many years ago, it's possible we have a similar Emperor now. It's just in a much more powerful and unbridled state. The multitude of minds continue to speak to Guilliman, again in confusing and contradicting manners, calling him a son, not a son, a thing, a name, not a name, a number, a tool. Information of the galaxy is forced into Guilliman's mind, and Guilliman all the while continues to plead to speak with his father, an end to this assault on his senses. But as more words come from the minds, father, not a father, thing, victory, defeat, choose. A powerful formation of a great will and power begins to come together. And it's said not for the final time, but nearly the final time. And this is the Emperor making the clearly mighty effort to pull together all of these broken and shattered parts of his mind to truly speak with his returned son. Guilliman, the voices overlaid, overlapped, became almost one, and Guilliman had a fleeting memory of a sad face that had seen too much, and a burden it could barely countenance. Guilliman, hear me, my last loyal son, my pride, my greatest triumph. How those words burned him, worse than the poisons of Mortarion, worse than the sting of failure. They were not a lie, not entirely. It was worse than that. They were conditional. My last tool. My last hope. A final drawing in of power. A fault expelled like a dying breath. Guilliman. Oh man, the feels here. When you get the sense that this is it. This is the Emperor speaking to his Primarch, the father speaking to his son. Guilliman, hear me. It's almost as if the Emperor's pleading with Guilliman to hear these words, that he knows the fractured madness he's become, the effect it's having on Roboute. That hear me. Oh man, he's putting everything he has into speaking with Roboute, as if all this consciousness has been drawn from across the galaxy, from across the Imperium, to this moment within the throne room. My last loyal son, my pride, my greatest triumph. Now we see Guilliman taking the burden of those words quite harshly, to say the least, feeling like it is conditional to him achieving victory, because the Emperor follows it with my last tool, my last hope. And I guess this is as ever within the lore, down to how you want to interpret it. For me, I certainly don't take this as cold and careless. If anything, through the sheer effort the Emperor had to draw together to be able to speak these words with Guilliman, preceding it with "my last loyal son," not just the last tool. This shows perfectly to me, despite it all, there is still some form of that humanity left. The barest glimmer, no doubt. Almost the last trace of it. But it's there. Honestly, I found it very moving, because I thought it had been long drawn out of him through all the suffering upon the throne, that the shattered minds of before were all that we would get to see. Yet it wasn't. The Emperor made the almighty effort to try and speak with his son, to try and connect with him through all the madness of the different minds. And don't get me wrong, I can absolutely understand Guilliman's hurt. He's been drawn back from death, returned to an Imperium 1,000,000 miles worse than the one he left. And that was in the aftermath of the heresy. He's surrounded by chaos, with an entire race looking to him for salvation, and with no one to talk to. All he wanted was a comforting ear, and words of comfort from his father. But it's simply something the Emperor can't give him anymore. At least not to the level Roboute needs. The Emperor gave everything to impart those few short words to his son, imploring him to hear him. Yet for Guilliman, despite perhaps receiving the practical guidance he needed, take the fight back to the enemy, where what he really needed, or what he wanted, was the emotional. Man, it's such a fascinating moment. Do I have an issue with the Emperor saying "my last tool," "my last hope"? No, not at all. I may be a supporter of the caring father Emperor, as you guys know, but he's never lied to them in what they were created for. They were generals of war first and foremost. The fate of the species depended on them. We've seen enough now, I think, with the calling them sons from the start, before any of them were even found. The villas created beneath the palace. I think all of this truly banishes the uncaring mythos of the Emperor. The truth is a fine line in between. They were created to be tools of war, but as any human, he came to love them as sons. The gift and curse of humanity in a nutshell. For all the Emperor's elevation, he is still human. I'll also say I personally don't believe the Emperor is specifically calling Guilliman his greatest triumph. When he says "my last loyal son, my pride," I believe he is truly referring to Guilliman, his son, because the Emperor had pride in all of his Primarchs. However, the greatest triumph he follows it up with, I'm not necessarily sure is directed directly at Guilliman. Of course it could be, but for me I feel it's a reference to all of the Primarchs, because they were his greatest triumph, in his own words. I could be wrong, of course, that's just the way that I interpret it. It's a little too on the nose for it to be put out there that it is Guilliman that's the greatest Primarch of all. Outside the lore, it ruffles a few too many opinions. It's one of those ambiguous comments left to interpret how you wish. For the most part, I guess many will see this as relating directly to Guilliman, and you could very well be right. He is, after all, talking directly to Guilliman. And let's not take any shine away from Roboute here. He may not have been at the Siege of Terror, but his role as Lord Commander in the aftermath truly held the Imperium together. Now, even more interestingly after this, Guilliman asked Valoris what he saw when they were within the throne room, and all Valoris saw was Guilliman standing there talking intently with his father. No screaming, no kneeling, nothing but Guilliman standing before the throne. And each time Guilliman remembers this scene, he remembers it differently. So frustratingly as always, that mysterious door is left open to ask if this was real or not. Did it truly go down like this, or more like Valoris saw? That's a question we may never get answered. For me, I think both are most likely correct. Valoris saw what was actually transpiring, and the scene that Guilliman lived took place psychically within his mind, as the Emperor communed directly with his son. As for Guilliman, his fate against Mortarion goes on, and we'll discuss the outcome of that later in the week, because this is only the beginning for the Emperor of Mankind. But as always guys, what do you think? What do you think of the Emperor communing with Guilliman? Are you surprised to see his mind possibly shattered into many different aspects, at the effort it requires for him to draw them all back together? And what do you believe the Emperor was trying to tell Guilliman in those final words? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.